American Football Stories.
That's awesome. It seems like a lot of work. I know you said you got some sleep this go around because how you structure everything, but just kind of giving our audience a baseline view of how many hours you kind of put in on an average, just breaking down film and just watching these players per day.
Yeah, I watch a lot. So it's, I would say that during between, say, June and December, I would say I probably watch a good 25 to 30 hours a week at least. And that's not including NFL film, because I spend probably another 40 hours a week watching NFL stuff for football guys, writing about pro players. And that informs my college, how I look at college players, because I'm studying the pro game for probably 40 hours a week throughout the entire season. And then I take notes of that for the following year's RSP to see if there's anything that I need to update. Wow. And then I'd say from about Thanksgiving through April, I'm probably watching closer to 70 to 80 hours worth a week of film. I would say that's probably what's going on at that point.
For college.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just college. And the pro goes by the wayside until September. So
do you need us to tell you who won the Super Bowl?
I think I saw
no
that.
Spoilers.
I know spoilers. I did see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver core in awe over Patrick Mahomes trying to win the game by himself without an offensive line while losing big time.
Just for reference, if this is anyone's, like, Matt watches exclusively film, right? You're not sitting there on Saturdays watching the games.
No, I don't.
In case anybody hasn't heard you before.
No,
yeah.
I don't watch games at all. I mean,
you're just all film all the time.
Yeah, one game. I've watched one game this past year, for the fun of it, and it was the Cleveland Browns Baltimore Ravens game in Cleveland on
Monday
Thursday
night
game,
or Thursday
night game.
Yeah,
it was either Sunday or Thursday night. I don't remember which one.
Yeah,
and it was fantastic. And
it
was. And pros kind of like the fun thing for me. Like I'm an NFL fan, so I will watch. I'm watching the games for work, but those are fun for me. College to me is just work. It's like I'm here to evaluate players. I don't care about the score, other than just if it's something's in context of what I'm watching. I don't care about who's up for an award, who's winning the SEC, who's winning the ACC. I don't care. I don't care. Don't even look at their records. I don't do any of that.
Well, Matt, that's a great segue into our next question. Because just for our audience out there, could you tell us what is the difference between what you do as far as breaking down film with the rookie, scouting portfolio versus to what an NFL scout does in regards to, breaking down film and going through their process?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some big differences. I mean, we both watch film, that's for sure. We both have very different processes. And we'll talk about some of those in a minute. But the main difference is right off the bat is that they have to spend a lot of time researching about what the players' practice habits are like, how they are off the field. Are they good students? Are they good students of the game? Are they good citizens? Have they had any issues that the team that they're going to have to report back to the team and help determine, or at least give accurate enough information so that the team can determine whether or not this is a player worth investing in and taking a chance on? Because all people are in this particular age group are maturing, and I can't tell you how many times as a manager or a director, I've hired people who I've seen notes from judges, or different things where they're like, this was kind of something that happened 3, 5, 7, 10 years ago. And they were absolutely great employees, like indispensable and fantastic leaders, but they made mistakes that, 18 to 22-year-olds often make. So, things like that, they have to look at those types of things. They have to have those types of conversations and do that kind of investigation and background, whereas I don't. The difference is in terms of how we study players. Most NFL teams have a system that's with a grade of a 1 through 7. I think maybe it's a 1 through 9, but really no one, it's just like evaluations in corporate America. no one really gets scored below a 3. No one ever gets scored really above a 7 unless like there's like high up approval from top of the leadership chain to give that type of a score, just like when you do evaluations in corporate America. And there's a lot of variation because it's not always well defined what it is that they're looking for. Like they'll have criteria, but it doesn't define what that criteria is. And I talked to guys like Matt Williamson, who's a scout for the Cleveland Browns, or Russ Landy, who's been scout with the Rams and the Browns, and as the personnel head of U.S. scouting for the Montreal Alouettes right now, who's on my podcast every couple weeks. And my system is more defined in terms of everything that you're looking for. There's a definition for it and what the score means for it. And if something I look at doesn't fit the definition because I haven't seen that before, or there's a new way of looking at that maybe I need to redefine, then the next year or the next couple of years, I'll redefine that criteria point and decide how I'm going to weigh that and change it. Whereas with the NFL, they've had the same basic system since Blesto was around in the 1950s and 60s and scouting for everyone. And they've never gone through what is it that we do. Now, there's some great scouts. Like, I'm not saying I'm a better scout than guys who've been doing this 20, 30, 40 years. Those guys are incredible. And I would be honored to be able to get to sit in a room and scout with them and learn from them or watch them do their job. But their system, they've learned in spite of their system, and they make adjustments probably on their own. And the best teams are always like, what is it that we're looking for in a player? And they're aligned with their coaches, with their scouts, and with their front office about what they're looking for, even if their grading system sponsors a lot of variation. And see, my grading system was meant to like reduce variation and to make a subjective thing as objective as possible. And therefore, if it doesn't fit something in with your system, you can then address it and continue to learn from it. Whereas with them, they haven't done that. So what happens is, like, say we were gonna, Robert, say we were gonna hire like Nick to answer the phones for your business, and we had 5 people in your business that were going to decide. We asked them, well, how should they answer the phone for your business? What should the greeting be? Well, they all could have half of them could have worked in that capacity of what Nick's about to do. Half of them could have been leaders who've had people doing that before, and they all may give you a different answer. And the fact that they give you a different answer for just a routine task and of what's expected, think about important tasks like, the guy who's going to be managing your operation, like your quarterback, or someone who's going to be a big time contributor team member, like a star wide receiver. If you don't have it on the same page of what you're supposed to be looking for, then you create this variation of what people know and what you assume people know. And that's where I would say my evaluation process has an advantage, according to people that I know who've been in the league. But my expertise in terms of football and scouting, I'm not even going to compare to some of the best scouts in the game. I know those guys are like fantastic, but that gives you an idea of the difference between a media scout like me who has his own process versus what the NFL's processes are, good or bad. And then as well as what the NFL knows, because you can have great players with great ability, but if they're not geared towards having the maturity or the ability to be good students and employees of the game, whether it's on the field or off the field, it doesn't matter what I see or don't see or what they see or don't see, because they may not even be good enough to be just everyday punch in the clock in and out professionals.
Yeah, that's some awesome stuff, and thanks for sharing that difference with us and our audience, Matt. Just like Nick said, we got our copies of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, and I tell you what, it's awesome. So if you're out there listening to our podcast right now, definitely go pick up that copy. But one portion of the the Rookie Scouting Portfolio that I kind of want to hit on right now is the film study as the best evaluator of talent. So could you dive in a little bit deeper and talk about, just the film study and why is that the best evaluator of talent out there, Matt?
Yeah, because really, I mean, at the end of the day, the best analytics people I know, and I know some who have worked with multiple teams in the league, and they're not just working with some quality control coach, which doesn't mean that's a bad thing, but they're actually working. They've been hired by a GM directly to do the kind of work that they do. They have that kind of phone call relationship with the head of the organization in terms of the personnel department. And they're people who've also had scouting backgrounds. And what they'll tell you, and even the ones who don't have the scouting background, who are just straight up analytics, will tell you that the best analytics are a reflection of what you see on the field. And that if it doesn't mimic that on the field, it's not a reflection of that, then you need to question your process for the analytic. It shouldn't be that your analytic is going to replace the film. So analytics don't always give you, they're valuable, but if you rely solely on them, then you can wind up over filtering players out of your process who should belong there. For instance, there was a big time media analytic on wide receivers that if they were less than 6'2" in height and less than 210 pounds, I think, they were guys that people were recommending that you needed to filter out. Like, they don't even need to be a part of the equation. But, if you do that, then you're ruling out Deshaun Jackson, who's been one of the most, productive receivers in the past 10 to 15 years. You're figuring out Steve Smith, who might be one of the best receivers of all time. Wes Welker. You're ruling out Marvin Harrison, who was one of the best all-time receivers. Henry Ellard, Santana. I mean, I could go on. Odell Beckham Jr. would not have even been in the conversation because he didn't quite hit that mark. And there are some teams that kind of had analytics people kind of recommend that let's filter out these players. And they're like, no, see, we don't want to go about that way. We understand what you're saying. So that's an important thing. But what we want to do is, if a guy's underneath that figure that you've, been able to find some sort of correlation about, that we want to understand why that player is the exception to that. And if they're exceptional to that, that means they're probably an exceptional player. And we want to target exceptional players. We don't want to just get players who meet a curve. And that's what numbers often do, is they say, it's the safe bet. Well, if you just focus on safe bets all the time, then you don't get exceptional players, and you're ruling yourself out for the great exceptions. And so the film helps you understand the relationships between the numbers and as well as what's going on the field, because you can look at a Steve Smith and you can see, well, he's not big, he's small, he's short, but he has incredible leverage. And how does that leverage work for him to express power? How does that leverage work for him to be able to win at the catch point? Oh, he has great leaping ability, so he can play bigger than his size. He takes contact well. He takes contact better than some 6'3" receivers that they're like, the analytics are, favoring. You get more context out of the film. So the analytics should be like a good editor that understands the context of the film and then kind of packages it in a way that's most appealing, that can be helpful, most actionable in a most actionable way. But if you don't have the film first, then you don't have anything to work with, because if you're just doing the numbers, you're suddenly cutting off a great deal of valuable content.
All I'm doing is picturing the mid 2000s Jaguars receiving core with Ernest Wilford and Reggie
Jones.
Williams and Matt Jones, all 6'6", and none of it all that great. That's all I'm picturing.
And what was Keenan McCardle? I think Keenan McCardle was like 5'11", 6 feet.
Yeah, he's not super tall. Jimmy Smith's not super tall either, if I'm not mistaken. So
he wouldn't hit the cutoff either. I think it's 6 feet or 6'1".
Yeah, that's
yeah. And I think this is an interesting conversation that we're having right now, Matt, in regards to, just watching film and breaking down players through the film process and just looking at analytics and, the narrative, during this, particular draft that we're in right now is regard to Devontae Smith and his weight and his size. And, you have the analytic people out there who's saying, hey, the only receiver that has produced over 200 yards that was a first round pick is, within the last, 10, 15 years is Marquise Hollywood Brown from the Baltimore Ravens. So to your point, Matt, just like you said, like if you're just basing everything off analytics, you're kind of taken away from the prospect, and, you're not really honing on the other things that he can do. Whether his release off the ball, whether it's, his catching, and, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is a great conversation for our audience out there to kind of, see the difference between breaking down film and just seeing it from an analytic standpoint.
Oh, absolutely. And it doesn't mean that Devonta Smith is without flaws and that he can't get pinned to the sideline by physical cornerback play, and he's got to figure out solutions to that. But and you could even make the argument, and I would listen to anybody saying this, that maybe he's not worth a first round pick. And I'm not saying him in general or him specifically, but receivers of that height and weight. Maybe you could say these are guys that are maybe too risky for a first round pick, and that you need to be, and what that tells me is that you need to have enough compelling criteria to mitigate that risk to counter that argument. And if you do, then you draft them. And I think that Devonta Smith does, so I'm okay with that. But what you want to get away from is having the analytics are the only answer and the final answer to everything. And I think sometimes what happens is that it's not the NFL analytics people that go too far. It's the media analytics people who are selling subscriptions that can have a bit of an air of finality to them, which as a result can produce a bit of a backlash or less trust in them, because they are presenting their information with such certainty and using sometimes what I would call a shtick to say that the film doesn't matter, the film isn't important, or is the film makes mistakes and therefore the numbers, we're mistake free, or we're better off to go with, and I don't need to watch the film to do that. It's kind of like saying, I don't need to learn grammar in order to be a writer. You might have a flair for telling a story, and that might be the analytics in that situation. But if you don't have just basic spelling and grammar, and you don't make, and I'm not talking like just people who accidentally use your and your incorrectly, or it's and it's, or things like that, but I'm talking like can't even piece together a full sentence on a regular basis, then it doesn't matter. And there are people out there in the community that sometimes they don't know the difference between a zone run and a gap scheme run, and what the difference between how a running back approaches that, or they don't understand the importance of how, certain types of movements for wide receivers to get off press coverage is more important than whether you have the size to get off press, or why certain numbers matter more and apply to different things. Like, you can look at the 40 time and look at the history of the 40 time and say, well, the best running backs had 40 times, but on these numbers are the most productive. That's what they might put, or something like. But then you could say, well, that's fine, but there are lots of exceptions to that. And really, the most backs with the most production might be the guys who had better 20 and 3 shuttle, 3 cone times. And why is that? Well, do you understand how the game works enough to understand how the numbers apply to the field, or are you just saying, well, when I look at the information, the data just tells me this, and I've reversed engineered what I'm doing, and I'm creating some sort of correlation equals causation that's not true. And that's what often happens in those cases.
For anyone wondering why so many NFL draft picks don't work out, all of the variables Matt just laid out, and then plus do it from the team's perspective, like what scheme they're being dropped in, and 100 other variables coming from the NFL side, you can see why the puzzle pieces don't always fit for what you just laid out there, Matt.
Yeah, or you look at guys like Paxton Lynch, who wanted to spend more time playing PlayStation than he did wanting to work on the tape, and really study the film and work at his game. Or a guy like Chad Kelly, who had all the talent in the world, in my opinion, to be the starting quarterback, and was on the precipice of doing so. But because he can't stay out of trouble and he creates issues for himself off the field, he was basically a weekend away from being the starter for the Denver Broncos, and probably would have been there. They wouldn't have ever had to draft Drew Lock. I mean, this guy, and he would have been way better than Drew Lock if you ask me. But this is a guy that was a weekend away, went to a Halloween party with his teammates and basically got drunk. And I think probably got stoned, picked a fight with his teammates, and then wound up and walking in somebody's apartment and sitting down in the middle of their apartment in the middle of the night, and he's never going to get a starting job. He may not ever have, he may still be on the third string of a team, but no team's going to want to use him, even though he's unbelievably talented. They don't feel like they can trust him to be the leader at the, handling the controls of a franchise. And nothing of that has to do with his incredible talent. This is a guy that before Deshaun Watson came to, Clemson, Chad Kelly was a dual threat quarterback. So when they said, you may have heard him ridiculous. People would say last year, it was ridiculous. He said he was faster than every quarterback in the league other than Lamar Jackson. Well, if you actually studied the film and knew about Chad Kelly, you'd know that what he said was not a lie. He actually, you go watch him against Georgia, and this is after he came off of a hernia surgery and an ACL tear, and he's out running cornerbacks and safeties, splitting them for 50-yard gains, where they had angles on him, and he wasn't even in shape yet from dealing with those injuries. So this was a special talent who blew it.
American Football Stories is brought to you by Coach Paint. Coach Paint is a great tool that allows us to add graphics to player highlight clips similar to the graphics you see on TV. Coach Paint offers the ability to clearly tellustrate video while increasing retention of information in a shorter amount of time. Up your game with Coach Paint today.
Thank you for listening to American Football Stories podcast. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, American Football Stories. We are working to grow our network on YouTube and would love to have you subscribe. You can find us also on Apple Podcasts, on Twitter at American FB Story, and on our website, AmericanFootballStories.com. I am Robert Parker. My co-host is Nick Knudsen. This has been another episode of American Football Stories.